Want to welcome one of the guests that I've got in the studio with me today, Jim Halliburton, aka also known as the HMO Daddy. Jim, are you there?
I'm here, yes. Thank you for inviting me along. It's a great pleasure to come today.
So, welcome into the station. We're going to be talking today about property. We're going to be talking about how to get involved in property, what made you get involved in property, and also what you kind of do and get involved in property. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. If you want a long story.
Move it closer to you.
Yes,
Move it.
Right. Sorry, yes.
Or you can
closer.
move the arm forward. Don't worry. Don't.
Okay,
There we go.
yes,
That's it. Nice and relaxed.
Okay. Yeah, I started in property in 91, but I really wanted to start probably in the region of 40 years before then. When I was a young lad, I wanted to go to college, and I had bed sit in a place called Clapham, South London. You may have heard of it. And I was talking to the landlord, who was very impressed that I was going off to college to get my A-levels so I could go to university, because his kids didn't want to do the same. And he was moaning to me about the price of property and saying that the first property he bought 7 years previously cost him £3,000.
What year was this?
This is back in 71.
So it cost him £3,000 in 71?
No, that was, it cost him £3,000 7 years previous to that. So we're talking about 60, I can't do the maths, 64, something like that. And this new house cost him 20,000. So it'd gone up from 3,000, it'd gone up literally 7 times in the space of 7 years. Phenomenal return. And you remember, in those days, if you earned £1,000 a year, you were considered rich. So this was a property doing the same thing. And that said, sold the seed. I wanted to do it, but then I fell in love, got married. My wife didn't like the idea of me going into property, so she put a kibosh on that. And for the piece of the matrimonial home and all the rest of it, I didn't pursue that. And gradually it sort of built up over the years. I watched that property in Clapham climbing and earning far more than I earned. And I was in lecturing. I managed to climb the greasy pole to a senior lecturer. And it came to a point where I said, enough's enough. And in 91, that's when it cracked. I decided to buy a property.
So for those that are listening then, so you're actually based in Darlaston of the West Midlands.
Correct. I was more Wednesbury in those days, but yes, some of you may have heard of what was it called? Wood Green College, it was called in those days. It's now called Sandwell College, but the old Wood Green Tech, I was a lecturer there, and they were desperate for accommodation for students. There was a very big shortage in Wednesbury, not surprisingly. It's not exactly a place for students. So I thought, here's the opportunity. I'll get into property. I went along and had a chat with the accommodation officer, who was very helpful. Gave me advice on how to go about doing it. So I chose the house. So it was quite easy. I just followed a pattern of being a student landlord. Bought a house for 35,000 back in 91. And as a poor lecturer, I didn't have £35,000 to buy the property. So I'd come across this book which showed you how you can raise money in your own name. So I bought that, and it told you that you just get some credit cards and you can draw money out on the credit cards. So that's what I did. I got 20 credit cards because I'm having a job, good financial status. When I got myself 20 credit cards, went into the bank, put the cards down, took the full amount out on each of the credit cards, put it in a Asda bag, walked into the solicitors, plonged it down and said, there's the money for the house. You can't do that today.
You can't do that today.
No.
So, and would you, if you had to start again, would you do the same thing again?
Well, the problem is that house now in Wednesbury will cost you about 200,000.
And how much did you pay for it?
35,000.
So you got 35,000 out on credit cards?
I got 35,000 out on credit cards, bought the house for 35. Now, your credit cards, you just about to come up with a deposit for a property. Things have changed, but you can get finance now that you can't get in those days. So, yes, I would still get property, but this time round, I'd have to change the strategy I'd use. So I'd probably go and buy myself the biggest house I could to live in, and then take lodgers on the property. And the great thing about lodges is you get the first 7,500 tax-free. So that's nice. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, that's the equivalent to earning another 15 grand a year. Probably not much to a higher rate taxpayer, but it's certainly what most people would think would be a reasonable wage just on the lodger's allowance. I'd do that. I would rent out the rooms and then change the property from being residential over to a buy-to-let mortgage and do the same again and build up the portfolio that way. You can do the same today, but you have a different strategy. The strategy would be you'd have to save enough to get a deposit. I'm not sure what residential mortgages now are. Probably get 90, 95%.
Yeah, you can get up to 95%.
95%. It's a long time since I had a residential mortgage. So you could buy a fairly large house for about, 200 grand?
Yeah.
As long as you don't do it in Wolverhampton, because they don't like you having HMOs in Wolverhampton. But Dudley's okay, and so is Samwell. Not Birmingham, because again, they don't like you having them. And let's out to lodges. So it's a way of getting in. Just because things change, you change your strategy. And there's a number of others. I do courses and tell people how to acquire properties. And the objection that you need money to buy property is it helps, don't get me wrong, to have money, but there's other strategies you can use, which the big boys use. But so can the individual use. So Arsh and I, we both do courses, don't we?
We do, yeah.
You still doing courses?
Kind of. Not as many as you.
Always information on, I've written books on it, explains how you can go about getting into property. If you wish to get into property, it's easy to do. It's a worthwhile thing, providing housing. As long as you can get over the negativity of the government and councils who seem to like to bash private landlords. Why, I don't know. We're providing a valuable service at a fraction of the cost that the social sector costs. I get housing benefit tenants, and if they go off to the social sector, they often get at least twice and sometimes 10 times as much as a private landlord gets paid. But no one ever says anything about that. They go on about, social landlords are good, private landlords are bad. But if you watch all the press and the reporting, a lot of it's going on about social landlords being a problem. So once I got in, the strategy I had, I gradually bought more properties. Lenders came into the market, and it was very much rinse and repeat, as they say. If you want to get used to buying properties, you can do so. So I built up quite a large portfolio.
So in its heyday then, Jim, yep. How many tenants did you have at its absolute max?
Maximum, I had about 1,000 tenants. It was just hitting 1,000 tenants up until about a couple of years ago, and then I sold some of the properties off. I'm still in somewhere in the region of 500 tenants who get housed by me, and I feel quite gratified that I've been able and privileged to be able to provide a service like this. I look after the tenants.
Okay, so it's a really interesting backstory there. So you've gone from college lecturer to property investor.
Yeah, not all at once. I stayed in the job in the early days, so I didn't leave lecturing until 2004. So I'd bought properties and built up a small portfolio of properties, and then I took early retirement from the college. The college was changing quite considerably. A lot of the work that it was doing had changed. So I decided to leave at that point and made a concentrate on property. I only had a small portfolio of about 8 properties then, and I decided that do I carry on with 8 properties, which would have worked. I mean, it would have been okay. I could have run those properties by myself and made a reasonable income. But I decided I'd want to go big. I didn't like the idea of doing the day-to-day running of the properties myself. I thought, I'll get staff. If I'm going to get staff, I'm going to have a lot more properties to pay for the staff. So I went out and bought 50 properties in a year in 2004 because the funding was there. It was, I don't know if you remember, pre-2008, banks were quite generous in lending. So I was able to do that. So it was set myself a target. And it's one of the dangers when you set yourself targets or objectives and you focus on doing that, you can achieve it. It's amazing. I always say it's a bit like being an intercept missile. But then when I got to the end of 2004, The much called for recession hadn't happened. So 2005, 2006, we carried on. George Brown said, end to boom and bust. I believed that until we fell off the cliff in 2008, which was a bit of a shock because I was in the middle of buying properties and the funding just dried up. So I had to sort of, had a bit of a bumpy time at that time and stopped buying properties. Then I gradually got back into it and still doing so.
So how do you find the funding for it, Jim? Because funding's a bit of a difficult topic, would you agree? Because it's very individual based.
Yeah.
For the last couple of weeks, I've had a couple of mortgage brokers on. So I had one broker on last week, James. The week before, we had Shaz, who was also talking about funding, and they were talking about, you know, the level, the lenders that were out in the marketplace. But from a property investor's perspective, how do you find getting lending for investment properties? So just imagine now, put yourself in the seat of a listener. What would you suggest to them?
Yeah, a difficult one. See, the problem is, to get buy-to-let lending is fairly simple. As long as you've got your own house, that's okay. I do mainly HMOs, which is slightly different. I'm in the commercial market. But a buy-to-let, it's fairly simple. As long as you own your own house, some lenders will even accept you if you don't own, if you buy properties to what we call buy-to-let. That's to let it to a single family. So you can buy houses and flats. And as I understanding, funding is there. It's more difficult. Lenders are much more cautious than they used to be and much slower. So getting funding forward is very difficult. Last year I went to remortgage 3 properties, and it took me the best part of a year and 3 different lenders. But remember, I'm talking about HMOs. Single lets, I would have had no problems in getting the funding for those. So I don't see there's a problem. I just know that lenders are more cautious, especially when it comes to dealing with houses in multiple occupation or bedsit type properties. They're nervous, and it didn't help with Liz Truss causing problems because a lot of the lenders just took fright at that and withdrew their products.
Okay, so what's the pros? What's the pros and cons? We'll go through the pros and cons of property investing. So from an investor's point of view, so if you were to do it again, would you go as big as you've ever gone, or would you scale it back and keep it simple? Because with the scale that you've gone to, you've had to deal with tenants, lots of tenants. You've had to deal with voids, bad debt, maintenance. You had to deal with staff. Would you go through all that process again or no?
Yeah, I noticed you left the worst to the last. It's the staffing that's the issue, and that's the thing that no one actually talks about. The great elephant in the roof is problems. Tenants are tenants. I don't have that much issues with the tenants. You expect them to do what they do. Most of them are wonderful. The vast majority are great tenants. You just got the odd, and I'm talking about a minority. We're talking about 1% who cause us 99% of the hassle, and we work to remove those. But yeah, would I've gone large? I don't know. I've wondered about this, and sometimes when things get hard, I wish, should I have kept those 8 little properties I had when I left lecturing, and I could now have had a pension and just kept it simple. But then again, I would have been doing it all myself, or playing it big. And I don't know, I've had an exciting time. It's great fun doing what I did. So,
but you can't deny the fact that the income that the properties have generated have allowed you to have a great life. Would you agree?
Well, that's the problem. If I have money, I use it to buy more properties. So I'm unlike the people who like to have nice cars and go away on nice holidays and have expensive clothes. I'm unfortunately still the little kid that was brought out of a kid's home, used to having second-hand clothes, not wasting money. That comes from the Scottish background. You've got to save your pennies. So when I open up a tin of beans, I scrape it round for about 10 minutes to get every bit of juice out. You come round to have a cup of tea with me. you got the tea bag that's for made the tea for about 12 other people. It's unfortunately the background you have. I can't break it. I'm trying to. A couple of years ago, I had a New Year's resolution to take more holidays, and I forced myself to do that.
Well, you have been. You've just
Come away, yes.
yeah. You've just come off the back of a cruise.
I have indeed. But then again, if you look at the logic of this, the cruise was cheaper than staying at home. You can get some really good bargains if you look around for cruises. So you end up with a luxury liner. You may not have the cruise you want to choose at the time you want, but if you shop around, it's phenomenally cheap, some of the cruises you can have.
So you say it's cheaper to go on a cruise for how long were you away for?
7 days.
So it's cheaper to go away on a cruise for 7 days than it is to stay at home for 7 days.
Well, not quite, because you still got to run the home and the house and the heating. But if you, the equivalent I'd put, it's cheaper to go on a cruise to live at that style. So if you went out and ate every day and had breakfast, lunch and dinner, you would pay more going around restaurants than you would do for the accommodation and the travel, going to all these exotic places on your travels, than you would do if you stayed at home. It is can be phenomenally good value.
And it can be, because even if you're in the UK, going to, let's say you go from Wolverhampton, you go into Birmingham, you spend the day there, you have lunch, you have a little wander around. Yeah, I get the logic. I understand the logic there.
Yeah, so maybe I'll flush out on some really expensive cruises, I don't know, or holidays. But yeah, it's what I like. It's I took my children with me and they enjoyed it, I think. So yeah, it was a good time. But unfortunately, yeah, I can't spend the money. But I'm sure my children will be able to do so in the future.
Okay, so let's get back to property then. So pros of buying property.
Pros. Well, if I was to start again, I don't think there's any other business I would do. I was a lecturer. Property provides a far better income than being a lecturer, more flexibility, and also the independence. Once you get used to working for yourself, working for an employer, even though I'm an employer now and I try and avoid the mistakes that I had when I was working, I look back at how we were treated as employees at times was pretty bad, though I had a very good employer in the main until, I suppose, they closed the college. So in some ways it was good, but I far more enjoy what I'm doing. The only thing is, doing property is a bit of a sort of, doesn't have the intellectual challenge that you got with lecturing. You don't have the reaction. So that's why I run courses and I write books about property. I've written 15 books and manuals about the properties because I like the challenge of looking at new things and talking about property. So it's very simple. I always say that if you want to be a landlord, then it's a bit like being a room cleaner in a hotel. That's the majority of the work you do, is cleaning up properties ready to re-let again. The excitement is in buying and acquiring properties. That's gives a bit of a buzz, and especially when you get a good deal, that makes it a little bit more fun. So yes, I can't think of any other way of making money easier than with property, because once you have a property, you rent it. In this part of the world, if you rent a property as a single let, it's very much a let and forget. That's a bit of a trade term, but a let and forget is when you let a house or a flat to a family, they will move in and they will stay there and they will take the property most of the time as their own and look after it. So you don't get that many people calling up and complaining about this being wrong and that being wrong. Once they've moved in and settled, they don't really want to even see the landlord. We have difficulty going around doing the annual checks for the gas and inspecting the properties because the tenants don't really want to be bothered by us. So that's a very easy way of making money, and you make it two ways. One, if you buy it right, you'll make money on the rent, and the rents have gone up phenomenally. What would you say, Arsh? They've gone up 50% in the last year?
Yeah, absolutely.
So poor people having to rent. Mortgages have gone up as well, but you can still make money out of property. One property won't make enough for you to retire on. You're going to need 10 or 20 single lets to make a reasonable income. But the great bonus about property is it goes up in value. You don't know when and how long it'll take, but historically, property has doubled every 10 to 20 years. Now, if you buy a house, remember I mentioned my first property, it cost me $35,000. If I was to buy it today, that's 32 years later, it would cost me probably over $200,000. So that's multiplied what? So I'm slow on maths here. It's gone up 6 times. What's that word? Sex tripled in price.
It's gone up 6 times. So I mean,
35,000. So, and that's just by staying alive. So you get the property going up, you make an income, the property goes up. Most of your tenants are appreciative. You look after them, treat them with respect, care for them. They look after your property. So no, I can't think of any better business to be in than providing property.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, we're about to go into an ad break in a couple of minutes. So just want to do a quick fire round of questions. So I was going to ask you the question, what else would you do instead of property? So would you do, starting from the beginning again, single let or HMO?
I would probably have to do HMOs. If you started with nothing, HMOs make a lot more income. So that would enable you to survive and buy more properties because the income is greater. But then I would make the change to single lets. My mistake was to remain in HMOs. I feel I should have concentrated more on going over to single lets at the time, and there was a lot more opportunity. But I got used to HMOs. As I say, my motivation to go big was because I wanted staff. So I had to feed these hungry people who wanted to be paid, and the way to do it was to have more HMOs. So that's why I went down that road. But if I was to do it again, I'd probably I wouldn't need the staff anything like if I was doing single lets. So sorry, even though I'm called the HMO daddy, I am inclined towards single lets.
We're going to talk about single lets after the break. So we've just got over a minute before we go to the break. But I want to talk about all the tax implications that go along with single lets now, because obviously there's been certain tax rules that have come in place which kind of makes some single lets unviable. So it'd be definitely something that we've got to talk about, because that's a big part of legislation. Now, before we go into a break, Jim, I want to ask anyone that's listening on Ramadan Radio, 87.8 FM, to WhatsApp the studio. So we've got a WhatsApp number. So feel free to WhatsApp 07 440 420 432. Or if you have got a question for Jim Halliburton, who is also known as the HMO Daddy, you can actually call in the studio by calling 01902 972 150. Or alternatively, if you want to do a quick read up of Jim whilst we're in the break, you can go to his website, which is www.hmodaddy.com. Is that right, Jim?
You've got it.
Yeah.
Well done.
Okay, and we will see you shortly after the break.
Chai Hub, your specialist street food outlet based on Broad Street, Wolverhampton, that serve all things breakfast, tea and desserts. We specialise in organically sourced desi teas like Karak Chai, pink tea and more. A family-owned business with the aim to give the people of Wolverhampton a taste of the East while providing a modern twist. We also serve sweet dishes, milk cakes, milkshakes and deliciously fried, fully loaded donuts. Chai Hub is available to order online on Just Eat and Uber Eats or through our website chaihub.com for an exclusive 10% discount.
Spice up your iftar with traditional spices and flavours from Indus. We go to great lengths to source only the best in Far Eastern flavours, with a wide range of spices, pulses, lentils and essentials for your kitchen cupboards. From our hot chilli powder to our range of beans and pulses. Find our range in leading local supermarkets and retailers. Indus, the world's finest foods. Fed up of eating the same thing week in, week out? Want to try something different? Well, your worries and stresses are over. ISO Sushi Wok and Grill, based in Chapel Ash, Wolverhampton, serves fresh, mouth-watering sushi and all HMC approved. We do chicken, beef, lamb chops, rice noodles, burgers, and we also have an extensive vegetarian menu for irresistible flavours and a great taste that'll get you hooked. Check out our menu online at isosushi.co.uk and order direct, or call us on 01902 689 544. Eat fresh, eat healthy, eat ISO.
People know they can rely on freshness, quality and choice when buying from Malik Butchers. For over 50 years, the master team of Malik Butchers have been delighting customers with exceptional halal meats, including premium Angus beef, Wagyu and our famous handcrafted sausages, along with in-house cured meats from the deli and delicious hot street food too. We're also offering next-day nationwide delivery at www.malikbutchers.com. So go take a butcher's. Call in 64 Dunstall Road, WV6 0NJ, or find Malik Butchers across social media.
Shop at Pack Continental Hunter Street in Wolverhampton for quality, choice and great prices too. Pack Continental are specialists for dried spices, powders, lentils and flour. And now for high oil-based fragrances from well-known brands, original scents and Bacor too. Also disposable cutlery and household products. Plus with frozen samosa, kebabs and fish, HMC approved chicken and meat and fresh fruit and veg, all delivered daily. You can pre-order by calling 01902 717792.
Rusty's on Jeff Cook Road, Wolverhampton. It's your local halal takeaway with the best food in town. With their huge menu, there's something for everyone, including pizzas, juicy smash burgers, loaded fries, the dreamiest thick milkshakes and more. Why not choose from Rusty's new platters? Perfect for getting the family together at iftar. Place your order online at rustysonline.com and receive 10% discount.
Ramadan's blessed days are the perfect opportunity to reach out to suffering families in the Ummah with our charity. You can do so by donating to one of Ummah Welfare Trust's many projects which are helping our brothers and sisters in Africa, Asia and the Middle East. In these difficult days, charity is one of the best ways to earn Allah's pleasure and protection. To give yours, call 0800 4 0800 11 or visit uwt.org.
Mina Bazaar, one of the UK's biggest collections of Asian bridal wear and fashion. Established for over 25 years, we're now showcasing and taking orders for our brand new catalogue. We have Mina Bazaar's men's bridal wear. We'll be stocking the very best in groom sherwani, fashion kurta and waistcoats. Book an appointment today and get 15% off during Ramadan at Mina Bazaar, 184 Ladypool Road, Birmingham, B12 8JS by calling us on 07970 265 956.
That's what caused the issue.
Oh dear. So yeah, Jim, second session, what do you want to, is there anything in particular that you want to talk about?
Probably sort of bring in mentorship that you can, I'm one of the only landlords who allows people to come and work in the business.
Yeah, okay, we can do that. We can add that in.
Probably throw that in a bit of advertising.
How's that going?
And it's not. I haven't had anyone for a while, which is strange. At one time I had 6. So things have an interest. And probably the other thing is if anyone wants accommodation, I've got 30 voids. And all seem to have void properties, which I find a bit strange. The Birch Street, the big one, that's got a waiting list.
It's got a waiting list of people, is it?
Mm.
How much are you charging there now?
It's gone up, I think now it's about 160.
160 a week?
160 to 200.
No.
For a room.
For a room? Own kitchen or shared kitchen?
No, you've got tea making facilities. So you've got a microwave, sink, kettle, fridge, and there's a shared kitchen. But people don't cook. You don't.
No, they don't. You just put microwave in the room. The
microwave in the room, and there's a proper kitchen. So you can see some of the kitchens are used, but most of them are fairly. There's little sign of cooking.
Okay. Right, 10 seconds, Jim, and we go back into session 2. Session 2 is shorter, believe it or not.
Oh.
3, 2, 1. Hi guys, welcome back to Ramadan Radio, and welcome to my guest who was with us just before the break. His name is Jim Halliburton, also known as the HMO Daddy. Jim, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine.
How are you feeling?
I'm enjoying myself. It's good fun.
Fantastic. So just a reminder for those that are listening, if you want to ask Jim a question, feel free to WhatsApp the studio on 07440 420 432, or you can actually call into the studio on 01902 972 150. So just before the break, Jim, we were talking, and you said that, yeah, if it is up to you, you would potentially still continue to keep running as single lets. So the reason why I say that is because lots of people that may be listening may not be interested in a HMO because of the legislation around it, and pretty much they may not want to deal with 5 tenants as opposed to 1 tenant, and they may just want a family because they're not using this as an investment, but perhaps almost like a nest egg for the future. So let's go through what's involved in single lets. Let's go through the legislation and how that's affected some of the single lets recently. So Section 24.
Yeah. The thing you'll find is as soon as the government brings in a piece of legislation that disadvantages people, especially relating to tax, they find ways around it. So Section 24 just stops people buying houses in their own name. Once upon a time you could buy it and you'd be able to get the tax relief on the mortgage interest that you paid. Now you can't unless you're a company. Or there's other ways around it. I don't want to get too much into detail. I think there's about 3 ways around this Section 24. So it's just ignored now. Everyone now buys in a limited company. So Section 24 is in
Did
fact
you
redundant.
transfer, so for anyone that's listening that may have properties in their own name, did you go through the process of transferring everything into a limited company, or
No.
some or some not?
No, I didn't. What I did was change. There's various ways of going about it. It gets very technical, and but there's you can incorporate. There is other ways of doing it, and I chose a different route, so you could avoid it. What I did miss was the 10% wear and tear allowance. That was a bit cruel to lose that, and also the abolition of admin fees. Administration fees, you're not allowed to take those anymore. That hit pretty hard, but Section 24 gave a bit of worry, but no real issue. It's easy to get round. So I can't see that as being an objection. But you're quite right, Arsh. It is getting much more difficult to run property. When I started back in 91, they didn't have housing standards. The student houses were just expected to be student houses, rough and ready. So literally all you had to do was put beds in the rooms, locks on the doors, and away you went. Obviously, as a caring landlord, you made sure everything was safe and sound, and I put smoke detectors in, which was considered a bit unusual. Now you get locked up if you don't put smoke detectors in. Quite an odd thing. And carbon monoxide detectors, that was something I did years previously, because in those days you heated the property using gas fires, which operated the flue. Gases went up the chimney, the old chimney. You don't have those anymore. I don't think you can actually fit a gas fire where it vents up the chimney. But in those days, that's quite common. So there was an issue with carbon monoxide, so I fitted carbon monoxide detectors ahead of the game. But you've got to make sure your tenants are safe. You've got to do it reliably. But all this legislation now is just, I think, gone over the top. And it's not even logical when you look at it and say, well, you brought in this bit of legislation. How many lives did it save? How many people are you going to save being injured? And when you compare it to, say, knife crime, domestic violence, and never mind smoking, drinking, obesity, the number of people who are killed or injured by property is virtually nothing. There's far more people, die through domestic violence. And yet there's no concentration in it. Landlords are expected to pay thousands and thousands of pounds to ensure their properties are what are called safe without any rational assessment of the risk that these things pose and the danger. If you're going to do something, there's got to be a reason. You've got to say, well, so many people are killed or injured, and by bringing in this, we will save lives. But they don't. It's ridiculous. I remember once having an argument with the fire service about having to put consumer units, that's the electrical units where the switch is in, and they're saying people die. And I said, well, how many fires do you get from a consumer unit? They were insisting at the time I put it in a fireproof box. So you had the consumer unit, which then had to be boxed in a fireproof box. And I thought, well, what's the point? And they couldn't find any evidence of a consumer unit causing fire, never mind causing death. But to build a fireproof box round a consumer unit would cost hundreds of pounds. So if that was multiplied all down the country by all the HMO landlords, it made no sense.
Is it just an income generating tool then? So asking us to put in
boxes around that. Well, who are you generating the income from? I suppose you're creating employment by for carpenters.
But when we look at all the other legislation that's come in place, like the HMO licence, the housing standards team, etc., has it just been an income generating
for the councils,
for the local authorities?
No. Because I've looked into this, and I'm quite friendly with many of the local authorities. You imagine, as a large landlord I get to know them. And licensing is an own goal. It doesn't achieve anything. I can't see the benefit of licensing. It sounds good, and it's a political soundbite. We're going to license and more licensing. But it costs the local authority probably twice as much to administer the licensing than they charge landlords. So landlords object, having to pay £800 for a licence that lasts 5 years. But it probably costs the local authority twice that to issue the licence because the manpower and time and administration that's involved, and they're not that, shall I say, that efficient in doing these things. So it's an enormous cost to the local authority. I take great pleasure when I listen to councillors going on about, we should do licensing, because it's the beast that devours its creator. The losses that council licensing departments make is phenomenal, but no one stops there. And it's all this idea that it achieves something, and it doesn't. It is just a waste of time. And landlords love it as well, because most landlords you'll come across, their big fear is competition. So anything that restricts competition is good. So it's a two-way own goal. All this legislation puts people off going into property, as you said. From the way you're talking, Arsh, you must come across a lot of people who are put off being HMO landlords because of the regulations. I'm thinking, great, less competition for me. I've got 30 voids. I've always got voids. In other words, a void means I've got an empty room that I want to fill. And I'm forever having this turnover of tenants, because no one wants to live in an HMO for the rest of their lives. A few do, but most don't. It's a temporary style of accommodation where you live in it's cheap. It's because of the bills are included. You have your own room. You could even have your own ensuite and kitchenette.
But you suppose you could use that as a pro, couldn't you? Because the rent's all inclusive. We've both got tenants that have been with us a number of years.
Correct.
In the same room, in the same property, where you've got no voids, no bad debt. So I kind of use that as a pro. We just need to find more people like that.
I do, and that's where I'm. So if anyone wants a nice warm room to move into, come along to J9 accommodation in Darlaston, and we'll house you. Because I say I've got 30 empty rooms at the moment, and so imagine if it was you could do what I did back in '91, just buy a house and start letting the rooms out. Anyone could do it. There'd be no restriction. So because there is now, you can competition always brings down prices and improves standards. So if the government and the council were smart, they would increase competition. I'm cutting my own throat by saying that, and I can see you going quite pale, Arsh, at the thought of lots of competition, and we'll have to do better. But yes, it will make things much more tighter. But no, they've gone about it the wrong way. As a politician, all this legislation isn't achieving what it should do.
And what was it set to achieve?
I think it's just political. It sounds good. So you say, and everyone likes to pick on someone, and it's now getting much, much more difficult to have anyone. Once upon a time, we'd have jokes about various people. Now you can't say that. And in fact, I can't even describe it probably on the radio. You'll probably blank me off if I started talking about the jokes we used to have once upon a time. So who you're left to abuse but landlords, dogs, and teachers. I think that's about the only ones left that you can do.
I don't think you can do teachers anymore.
Oh, can't you? No, you can't abuse those.
No, that's
that's gone.
Not that we said that you should do anyway. But anyway, so Jim. So we talked about the legislation side. We've had a look at all the pros of obviously what property can bring. Brings long-term generational wealth. It brings cash flow. It allows you to sustain and build other businesses off the back of it. So you've created other businesses off the back of it. More people wanted to get involved in property, and you've actually taught people how to get involved in property. You've actually got a mentorship scheme as well.
Yeah, that's right. I miss the lecturing, and as naturally at home, being a college lecturer, I like sharing information. I like talking about what I do, and I miss that when I went into property. As I say, you don't have the intellectual challenge that you get with property, that you get with talking with people, running courses. So I've always, since I started, was there to help other people going into property. I know you could say I'm creating competition for myself, and most of the people who have gone into doing HMOs have in some way been trained by me or had attended courses or read books by me. So yeah, I do. But also, though I make money at training, I offer free mentorship where you can come and work in my business, learn how to do the
So hang on,
skill.
so people can come and actually learn from you for free?
Correct. Yeah, I don't charge for the mentorship. I do other mentorships where I charge for and run courses for free. But you can come and work in the business. In other words, shadow it. Internship is, you want to put another term, to learn how to do property. And you get free accommodation if you're travelling. Because, as I say, I've always got plenty of rooms free, so empty, waiting to be let, so you can stay and have free accommodation. It's very much a two-way thing. I don't want you, before you start saying, put me forward for a knighthood or something like that, for being helping people and being charitable. It's a two-way thing, because
to be fair, it does have a ring to it, Sir Jim Halliburton.
Yes, it would do. Yes, I agree. But it's to help people, but that helps me as well, because you've got motivated people who want to learn about the business and they help out. Because however many staff you've got, you've always got peaks and troughs, and most of the time things are fairly steady, but at times there's people there to help in the business. So it's a two-way thing. I like to help people who want to get on in life. It's some sort of, I don't know, is it a failing or is it a benefit? You want to pass on what you've got, what you've learnt, and help other people do well. And so that's why I started it. I said it was for those who are time-rich, cash-poor, because you have this theory that you've got to have money to get into property. As I said, I started with nothing.
Well, technically, if they're going to come and train with you for free, they don't need money to get involved in property, because you're going to teach them different ways to get involved in property where you may not need to buy the property. Would you agree?
I would, yes. That's what we do. The old saying, you can get a property for £1 is true. I've done it on numerous occasions.
So you've bought a property for £1?
Well, you don't actually buy a property for £1. That is the token gesture for you to agree to buy the property. The properties cost many hundreds of thousands of pounds, but you can acquire the possession of the property. Once you've got possession of the property, you turn it into an HMO. The income is generated will help pay for the running of it all, and then you can go and get a finance. So you borrow the money to pay the owner. So it's a bit sort of a back to front way of doing things. It's a bit like saying, "Let me have a car. I will then go out and become a delivery driver." And I will therefore have an income. Therefore, I can go to the bank and get a loan because I've got an income, which will enable me to pay for the car. because property can be enormous liability to people. If they've got a property and you have to pay the council tax or the business rates if it's commercial, you've got the insurance on it, you've got the liability of it, people will allow you to take the possession of the property. In other words, you'd be renting it, but for a nominal rent, as I said, £1, with the right to buy it. It's called rent to buy. So there's ways of acquiring property. Now, that might sound very strange, but if you take the case of British home stores, what did they buy that property for? British home stores were sold for, was it £1 or £5? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was £1.
Was Manchester United. I can't remember the name of the brothers, the American. They didn't put any money into that. They actually borrowed the money that the company had. It happens in different types of businesses where you can borrow the finance to do this. And also, it's much harder now, but in the earlier days, when lenders are much more generous, I could go to a lender and say, this property would be worth X when it's full, and they would lend me the money to buy it. So I wouldn't even have to put a deposit down. Now you can't do that.
So how many properties have you acquired by using this strategy, by paying £1?
Probably in the region of about 60 over the 30 years I've been running as a landlord, where I take a property on sometimes £1, but I rarely pay the £1. You've got to remember I'm Scottish, my background. No one ever bothers to pick the £1 up, and I don't volunteer to give it. It's just a nominal figure to say, yes, we have an agreement. I will buy the property from you, and I'll buy it from you in the next year, 5 years, or whatever period of time it is. So it's a meeting of minds. Someone who's got a liability, can't sell the property, are happy to let you take the property off them and pay you later. Or there's other ways of doing it. You can JV, which is where
what's
you get...
What's a JV for those who don't know?
Sorry, yes. Joint venturing. Joint venture is where you have someone who's got some money, they'll lend you the money to put it down as a deposit to buy the property, the banks lend you the money, and then you share the proceeds. So you do the work, the JV provides the funding, and you then have a joint ownership of a property. 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. So it is another way of going about it. Once you've learned how to manage properties and run that, a lot of people don't want to deal with it. I'm amazed the number of people who say, I want to own property, but I don't want to be a landlord. I don't want to deal with tenants. And yet I find that's the interesting part of it all, apart from acquiring properties, doing a deal, is the interest and variety that tenants give you. But a lot of people say, no, I don't want to deal with that. Which is a bit like saying, I want to be a footballer, but I don't want to run around on a Saturday afternoon kicking a ball. I want to be a swimmer, but I don't want to get wet. I mean, it makes no sense. If you're going to be a landlord, it's dealing with people, but there's a natural sort of aversion to want to deal with tenants. I have no particular issue to it. But
is
then
that
again,
just because there's so much negativity? And again, you watch programs like Can't Pay, Won't Pay, and all we see is tenants living in properties rent-free, landlords not being paid for months or years on end. So, I kind of understand when someone says, well, I don't want to get involved because I don't want to deal with tenants, because they don't want to deal with the conflict, they don't want to have to deal with the issues, they don't have to deal with the maintenance. And that is a bit of a drag. Would you agree?
Well, we all deal with people, whatever business you're in. I mean, it's a bit like a teacher says, I don't want to deal with kids. It doesn't make much sense to me. If you choose to be a landlord, then you're just dealing with people.
There are ways of being a landlord, but without having to deal with it, where you can give it actually just to a letting agent, a managing agency.
Yeah, you JV with me, and I do it all for you. But you miss some of the fun. What I'm saying is, once you learn how to do it, tenants are not the nasty people make out. I'd say most of them are really good. The odd ones you have issues with, and most of that time it's down to your failure to properly vet the person. So you see these people who run up enormous amounts of debts. They should have never been let to in the first place if you'd done the investigation. So I I suppose you have to agree to differ. I can understand.
No, I get it. I understand it, and it's, you know, the pros and cons to both. But, you know, all depends on people, and more important, their personalities, because not everyone is set to be cut out as a landlord. Would you agree?
Absolutely right. I suppose everyone. That's right. So you wouldn't do that if you don't like the idea of doing it.
Going back to your scenario, you wouldn't be a lecturer or you wouldn't be a teacher if you didn't like children. So
yes,
if you didn't like working with kids, so there'd be no point. But in some respect, you wouldn't be a landlord. Everyone likes the thought of being a landlord, but no one actually wants to be a landlord.
That is very true. You're spot on with that one. And what I'm saying is, get over the fear, embrace it, and you'll find it's not an issue. And just accept. It's a bit like having a dog. The dog barks. It wants to go and...
no one wants a dog, Jim. I think you're the only one that likes dogs.
I love dogs and cats. So, yes, they're great, but they have their issues. They put hair all over the place. They bark and want to be taken out for an exercise. But, yeah, I mean, it gives a pleasure. So I wouldn't not go against it.
And we've actually just walked in our next radio show host, Ajaz Ali. Hi, Ajaz. How are you? You okay?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Which one are you on? Are you on number two?
Number 2.
Right, there we go. So, Ajaz, say hello.
Assalamualaikum. You okay?
So Jim, Ajaz is actually a solicitor and also property investor as well. So Ajaz is actually doing his show next, and he's asked if we can just stay on for 15 minutes just so that he can ask you some questions about property law.
Oh, good. All right. I'll have to ask him a few questions about property law. Yes.
Well, let's try and answer each other's questions then. And on your point about no one likes dogs, tenants tend to like dogs.
Tenants love dogs. Tenants can't pay the rent, but they can afford to pay the dog's food.
Yeah, exactly. Tenants love dogs for some reason.
And sometimes, Jim, have you noticed that when you go around to the property, that they may turn around and say they can't afford the rent that month, but they've definitely got Sky TV on, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, the full package.
Yeah, the full package. So, you know, their priorities are slightly different.
It is. I do find it annoying that tenants don't pay. And I'm a bit weird. Probably because I came from the background I did. I was brought up in a kids' home. Then in those days, they kicked you out at the great age of 15. I look at my kids at 15 and think, I was on the streets at your age. So I had sort of, shall I say, sympathy to people who are homeless and how terrible it is. Yet every tenant, so when I started in the business, I made certain rules for my business or policies. And one of them was that I would not evict someone who could not pay the rent. So I have a no eviction policy. And I boast that I've been running that for 32 years, where I will not evict a tenant who genuinely could not pay the rent.
I was going to say, you can't pay or won't pay.
And it's all won't pay. I evict probably somewhere in the region of 50 tenants a year. I was in court last week, 4 tenants I was evicting at the same time. I'm back in on Thursday to evict a tenant.
So you might be able to ask, I'll tell you what, Jim, we are going to have to wrap up for this session.
Oh, right.
Because we've not got long. So time flies, doesn't it, Jim?
It flies.
So when I invited you and said we've got an hour, believe it or not, an hour goes very quickly on radio.
Well, I'm talking about
what I
love doing, which is property.
Exactly.
And you're a great company to be with.
Oh, you're very kind, Jim. You're very kind, Jim. So let's
hope
that
the one friend that you've got.
Let's hope that the next host is equally as inviting. So I want to thank you very much for your time, Jim. Thank you for coming in, Ajaz. We're about to log off now. I want to thank you all very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you all next week. Take care and bye-bye.
Speaking to you shortly.